All right, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. You sent this in wanting to understand Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, through the lens of his recent interview with Lex Fridman.
Right.
We're talking over 2 hours of conversation here.
Yeah.
Seems that you're particularly interested in his economic philosophy and how he's applying it to, well, fix Argentina. But here's a question to ponder as we go through all this.
Yeah.
Can someone with such radical ideas,
Right.
remember he calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, can someone like that truly govern a nation?
It's certainly a bold experiment, especially given the state of Argentina when he took office just 11 months ago.
Yeah.
We're talking near hyperinflation poverty levels through the roof, a staggering amount of debt.
Okay.
It was a dire situation.
You're painting a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
Just how bad were things?
So think about this. In the first week of December last year, inflation was rising at 1% per day.
Wow.
That translates to an annualized rate of around 3,700%.
Oh, my goodness.
And by the middle of the month, some projections were as high as 7,500%.
It's unbelievable.
Add to that a decade of stagnant growth GDP per capita down 15%, and you can see why nearly half the population was living in poverty.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
It was.
So enter Javier Milei stage right with his radical free market ideas.
Yeah.
He fundamentally opposes government intervention, right?
Absolutely. At heart, he's an anarcho-capitalist.
Right.
Someone who believes the government should be minimized,
Right.
ideally to the point of non-existence.
Right.
But even Milei acknowledges that such a system is difficult,
Okay.
if not impossible to implement in the real world.
Yeah.
That's why he describes himself as a minarchist in practice.
A minarchist.
Yes.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that term.
Essentially, a minarchist believes in shrinking the state to its absolute minimum functions.
Okay.
Things like protecting individual rights and enforcing contracts.
Okay.
Think of it as the bare bones of government with minimal intervention in the economy.
So he's trying to shrink the government as much as possible, even if he can't completely eliminate it.
Exactly.
This makes his path to this philosophy all the more interesting.
Uh-huh.
In the interview, he talks about a major aha moment that changed his entire outlook.
Right.
What was that?
It all started back in 2013, 2014 when he was researching economic growth.
Okay.
And he came across the work of Murray Rothbard,
Okay.
an influential Austrian school economist. Rothbard's critique of traditional economic theories,
Yeah.
especially on monopolies, completely shook Milei's understanding.
This is where he realized everything he'd been teaching about market structures for the past 20 years was wrong.
Exactly.
Talk about a humbling experience.
It was. It sent him down a rabbit hole, devouring works by other Austrian school giants like Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Wow.
He even mentions Human Action by Mises as particularly impactful, saying he read the entire thing in a single weekend.
Wow, that's dedication.
It is.
But it seems this intellectual deep dive had a profound effect on him. It did.
He becomes president and immediately takes a chainsaw to the Argentine government.
Yeah.
Figuratively speaking, of course.
Right.
He slashed ministries, laid off government employees, and did away with price controls.
Yep.
It seems like he was moving at lightning speed.
He was. He managed to achieve a fiscal surplus within his first month in office.
Really?
A remarkable feat, considering Argentina's history of deficits.
Wow.
This was the start of his economic transformation, cutting spending, reducing government intervention, and letting market forces play out.
So less government, more free market.
Exactly.
But what were the real-world consequences of these radical reforms?
That's where things get complicated.
Okay.
On the one hand, Milei argues his policies didn't create poverty. They simply revealed it.
No, okay.
You see, Argentina had operated under price controls and rampant money printing for so long.
Okay.
It created this illusion of affordability.
So people were struggling, but the distorted prices masked the true extent of their poverty. Precisely. By removing those controls, Milei brought transparency to the market.
Okay.
But this also meant the true cost of living became painfully clear, at least initially.
So in the short term, poverty rates actually spiked under Milei.
They did. In fact, they jumped to a staggering 57%.
Wow.
A stark reminder that radical change often comes with short-term pain.
Okay, so there was pain. But what about the gains? Did his policies deliver on their promises?
Milei insists they are starting to. He claims that both real wages and pensions have been steadily rising and points to the drastic decrease in inflation as proof his policies are working.
Speaking of inflation,
Right.
didn't we say it was something like 54% when he took office?
It was a staggering 54%, yes.
What's it at now?
Wholesale inflation plummeted to just 2% under Milei's leadership.
Wow.
That's a 27-fold decrease.
That's incredible.
And while consumer inflation still exists, he argues that when you adjust for currency devaluation and global inflation, it's actually incredibly low, a mere 0.2% per month.
That's just 2.4% annually. A far cry from the potential 17,000% projected just a year ago.
Right.
That sounds pretty impressive.
It is.
But what about the people struggling right now?
Yeah.
How does Milei address their concerns?
He acknowledges that his reforms have been tough on many Argentinians.
Okay.
However, he believes they are necessary to break free from the cycle of government intervention and economic instability.
Okay.
By shrinking the state and empowering individuals, he believes he can create a more prosperous and ultimately a more equitable society.
Okay, so that's the economic side of things.
Right.
But in the interview, Milei also talks a lot about corruption and his fight against the caste.
Yes.
What exactly does he mean by that?
He's referring to the entrenched political elite that he believes benefits from corruption.
Okay.
He views them as parasites bleeding the country dry. He's determined to expose and dismantle their system.
And it's not just about economic reform.
No.
He's also a fierce advocate for free speech, which he believes is essential for holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to his, shall we say, enthusiastic use of social media, especially X, formerly known as Twitter.
Right.
He doesn't hold back, calling out journalists and media outlets he views as biased or corrupt.
Yeah.
He even compares them to extortionists at one point.
It does.
It's a pretty bold strategy.
It is.
And certainly not one that's winning him any favors with traditional media.
No, not really. But Milei sees social media as a tool for transparency and accountability.
Okay.
A way to bypass the gatekeepers of information and connect directly with the people.
Okay.
This also ties into his admiration for Elon Musk and X's commitment to free speech.
Right, the Elon Musk connection.
Yeah.
They seem to have a genuine friendship.
They do.
They've even talked about their shared concern for demographics and population growth.
Right. It's more than just a personal connection, though.
Okay.
They both seem to share a certain rebellious spirit, a willingness to challenge the status quo and disrupt systems they see as broken.
Okay.
In a way, they're both fighting for freedom,
Uh-huh.
just on different battlefields.
Interesting point. So back to Argentina.
Yeah.
In the interview, Milei talks about specific actions he's taken to fight corruption.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions eliminating middlemen in social programs, strengthening law enforcement,
Yes.
and even taking on these piqueteros.
Yeah, the piqueteros are basically protest organizers,
Okay.
often involved in social movements and demonstrations. They're known for blocking streets and disrupting public services.
Right. And Milei sees them as part of the problem.
He does.
He calls them poverty managers,
Yeah.
arguing they profit from the system while keeping people trapped in poverty.
Right.
He tells this fascinating story about cutting off their funding and facing down one of their leaders who threatened a massive protest.
Yes, that's right. One of the most prominent piqueteros predicted that 100,000 people would show up to protest Milei's policies.
Wow.
But Milei didn't back down. He enacted this anti-blockade protocol, making it clear that anyone obstructing public roads would face consequences.
And what happened?
Only 3,000 people showed up.
Wow.
It was a major blow to the piqueteros' power and signaled that Milei was serious about taking on these entrenched groups.
It definitely shows he's not afraid of a fight.
Right.
But it's not just about dismantling corrupt systems.
No.
It's also about rebuilding trust, right?
Yes.
Especially in a country like Argentina with its history of economic and political turmoil.
Exactly. And that's why his emphasis on transparency is so crucial.
Okay.
He wants to open up the flow of information, empower citizens, and hold those in power accountable.
Okay.
And that's where his fight for free speech comes in.
He's very passionate about this.
He is.
It's seeing free speech as absolutely fundamental to a free society.
Uh-huh.
He even draws this fascinating parallel between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the rise of social media.
It's a bold comparison.
It is.
He sees the fall of the wall as a symbolic defeat of socialism, but argues that the fight has simply shifted to new battlegrounds, culture education,
Okay.
and now the digital realm.
Yeah.
He sees the internet and social media in particular as vital for challenging what he views as harmful ideologies.
And this leads us to a somewhat controversial topic.
Okay.
In the interview, he talks about cultural Marxism. infiltrating these spaces.
Yes.
He mentions things like gender ideology, environmentalism, and identity politics,
Right.
claiming they're being used to undermine traditional values and justify greater government control.
It's definitely a hot-button issue.
It is.
Cultural Marxism is a term used to describe the idea that Marxist principles have seeped into cultural institutions,
Okay.
promoting ideas that erode traditional values and societal structures.
Okay.
Whether or not one agrees with this concept,
Right.
it's clear that Milei sees it as a real threat to individual liberty and free markets.
He even brings up specific examples like a feminist president accused of domestic violence
He does.
to highlight what he views as hypocrisy within these movements.
Yeah.
It's definitely a provocative stance.
It is.
But regardless of whether you agree with him,
Mm-hmm.
he raises important questions about the role of ideology in shaping public discourse.
He's essentially arguing that the battle for freedom isn't just about economics. It's also about ideas, values, and the narratives that shape how we see the world.
He's certainly not afraid to stir the pot.
No, he is not.
This is where the comparisons to Donald Trump come in.
Yeah.
They both challenge the establishment, appeal directly to the people, and are afraid of controversy.
Right.
Milei even seems to admire Trump's courage and willingness to fight back against what he perceives as unfair attacks from the media and political elite.
And Milei draws a direct parallel between the attacks on Trump and the attacks he himself has faced in Argentina.
Okay.
He sees them both as victims of a coordinated smear campaign by those who feel threatened by their message and their policies. He even talks about the toll it's taken on him personally, mentioning how his father nearly had a heart attack after being targeted by the media.
It humanizes him a bit.
It does.
Behind the bold pronouncements,
Right.
there's a person who deeply believes in what he's doing, willing to endure personal attacks to see his vision through.
And that vision extends beyond Argentina.
Right.
He sees himself as part of a global movement for freedom, a fight against socialism, corruption, and the overreach of the state.
So he's not just trying to fix Argentina, he's trying to change the world.
It seems that way.
That's quite an ambition.
It certainly is, but it's also a deeply polarizing vision.
Okay.
His critics view him as reckless authoritarian and even dangerous.
Uh-huh.
They point to his admiration for figures like Trump and Elon Musk as evidence of extremist tendencies.
It's true. His policies are radical.
Yeah.
His rhetoric is often inflammatory.
It can be.
And his approach to governance is definitely unconventional. But regardless of whether he succeeds or fails,
Right.
his presidency is guaranteed to have a lasting impact,
I-
both in Argentina and potentially even beyond. It really is quite a story. He's forcing people to confront some uncomfortable truths about their own beliefs and values.
Right, like he's holding up a mirror to society and asking,
Yeah.
are you truly free, or are you living in a gilded cage of your own making?
That's a powerful question. And his vision for a free Argentina doesn't stop at its borders.
No, it doesn't.
In the interview, he talks about strengthening ties with the United States and Israel, aligning Argentina with what he calls the free world.
Right.
He even mentions wanting Argentina to join NATO.
That's a big step. That's a significant departure from Argentina's traditionally neutral stance in global affairs.
Yeah.
It really underscores how seriously he perceives the threat of authoritarianism, particularly from countries like China and Russia. He sees this geopolitical landscape as a battle between freedom and tyranny, and he wants Argentina firmly on the side of freedom.
And let's not forget his controversial proposal to dollarize the Argentine economy.
Right.
It was a major point during his campaign.
He actually prefers to frame it as currency competition.
Okay.
He argues that Argentinians should be free to choose which currency they want to use,
Okay.
believing that a free market for currencies would lead to the most stable and efficient system.
So instead of forcing people to use a potentially unstable peso,
Exactly.
he'd let them choose more stable currencies like the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, like the U.S. dollar.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is, and while he admits it's not feasible at the moment,
Okay.
it's clear that he's committed to exploring all options when it comes to reforming Argentina's economy and its place in the global financial system. But for now, he's focusing on stabilizing the peso and creating the conditions for a smoother transition to a more open monetary system.
It's certainly a lot to take in. And through it all, he maintains this rock star persona.
He does.
Remember, this is a guy who used to be the lead singer in a rock band?
Oh, wow.
He definitely doesn't fit the mold of a typical politician.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's got that charisma, that energy, that rebellious spirit.
Yep.
He even compares his political rallies to Rolling Stones concerts.
That's amazing. He really embraces being a showman,
He does.
using his platform to spread his message of freedom.
And it's not all style and showmanship.
Right.
Milei is also deeply intellectual, well-versed in economic theory, and truly passionate about the ideas he's trying to implement.
He sees this as his chance to put those ideas into practice and prove that a freer society is a more prosperous and just society. But can someone with such radical ideas actually govern a nation? That was the question we posed at the beginning of this deep dive.
It's a grand experiment, a gamble on a scale rarely seen in modern politics. Javier Milei is a fascinating case study, an unconventional leader attempting a radical transformation in one of the most challenging economic and political environments imaginable. Only time will tell if he'll succeed.
But one thing is certain, his presidency is shaking things up. He's sparking debate about the role of government, the power of free markets, and the very meaning of freedom itself. And his passion for these ideas is undeniable.
Remember his iconic phrase, "Viva la libertad, carajo." Long live freedom, damn it. Whether you agree with him or not, his conviction is remarkable. This deep dive has given us a lot to consider.
Now, the question for you is, what do you think? What role should government play in the economy? How do you define freedom? Let us know your thoughts.